The airport was buzzing with its usual rhythm. Families saying goodbye at departure gates, business travelers hurrying through security checks, and announcements echoing across the terminal. Among the sea of passengers, one woman stood quietly at the corner of Gate 27, holding nothing more than a small carry-on bag. Her name was Sarah Malik. To anyone passing by, she looked like just another passenger waiting to board her flight. But destiny had reserved a role for her that no one on that plane could have imagined. Sarah boarded Flight 417, bound for London. She found her seat near the middle by the window and pulled out a book to keep herself occupied. Around her, conversations filled the cabin. A young boy excitedly told his father about visiting relatives. A group of tourists laughed as they compared travel photos. Everything felt ordinary, routine, safe. But ordinary moments have a way of breaking into chaos when fate intervenes. Half an hour after takeoff, as the plane settled into cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, serving drinks and snacks. Sarah accepted a cup of tea with a polite smile, unaware that every sip brought her closer to the moment that would change everything. It began with a sound, sharp, commanding. A voice shouted in a language that not everyone understood. Then came the metallic click of weapons being revealed. 3 men stood up suddenly, their faces hidden behind masks. In their hands were rifles, held steady with terrifying precision. Gasps spread across the cabin as passengers froze, their lives now at the mercy of strangers. "Stay in your seats! Nobody move!" One of the terrorists barked, his voice echoing through the confined space. A flight attendant dropped her tray, the clatter of falling cups silenced by fear. Parents held their children close, and the air itself seemed to grow heavy, thick with dread. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. Years ago, she had learned how to master fear, not because she was fearless, but because she understood the strength of composure. Her training as a psychologist had taught her how panic spreads like fire. She knew that one wrong move could ignite chaos among passengers, making the terrorists' job easier. The leader of the group ordered the pilots to divert the plane. One of his men forced the cockpit door open. The cabin, once filled with casual chatter, was now a silent prison in the sky. A woman began to sob quietly in row 14, while an elderly man clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. Every second stretched into eternity. Sarah's eyes scanned the situation. She noted where each terrorist stood, how they held their weapons, how their eyes flickered with nervous energy despite their attempts to look in control. She didn't know what they wanted yet, but she knew one thing. If panic broke loose, innocent lives would be lost before negotiation could even begin. So she did something unexpected. She raised her hand slowly, deliberately, and spoke in a steady voice. "Please," she said, looking at the nearest gunman. "There are children here. Let's not frighten them more than necessary." Her tone wasn't confrontational, it was calm, respectful, but firm. The masked man hesitated, his finger tightening on the trigger for a split second before loosening. He hadn't expected someone to speak so directly and yet so gently. The other passengers stared at Sarah in disbelief. Who was this woman, daring to talk to armed terrorists? The leader turned toward her, studying her face. "Sit down," he ordered coldly. Sarah lowered her hand and nodded, but the seed had been planted. Passengers who had been trembling moments ago looked at her, and some of them drew a breath they didn't know they were holding. Her calmness, subtle as it was, began to spread. Minutes turned into hours as the plane followed its new unknown path. The terrorists communicated in short bursts, their plans still hidden. Tension clawed at every corner of the cabin. But Sarah stayed composed, quietly whispering to those nearest to her, helping the sobbing woman breathe, encouraging the young boy to keep his eyes closed and imagine he was safe at home. And though she didn't know it yet, every small act of courage she displayed was slowly shifting the balance inside that plane. The terrorists had the weapons, but Sarah had something they didn't: control over fear itself. The night sky outside was calm, but inside Flight 417, the storm had only begun. The plane soared silently through the dark skies, its engines humming steadily, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The terrorists had forced the pilots to change course. and Flight 417 was no longer headed toward London. Fear sat heavy on the passengers like an invisible weight. But amid that suffocating silence, Sarah remained calm, her presence quietly anchoring those around her. She could see the strain on the terrorists' faces. Their hands gripped their weapons tightly, but their eyes betrayed them. This was not effortless for them either. They were nervous, uncertain, and desperately trying to hold on to control. Sarah knew that fear worked both ways. Suddenly, the leader spoke. "We have demands. Our brothers will send the message to the governments. Until then, everyone here stays alive if they obey." His voice echoed across the cabin, harsh and final. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A child whimpered softly, and his mother quickly hushed him. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She knew the thin line between life and death was not in the weapons, but in how people reacted. If panic spread, chaos would erupt. She leaned slightly toward the sobbing woman beside her and whispered, "We breathe together, in and out. Quiet, steady, nothing else." The woman obeyed, her trembling easing just enough to avoid drawing attention. But Sarah also knew she could not stay silent forever. If these men intended to use the passengers as pawns, someone needed to humanize the hostages, to make the terrorists see faces, not bargaining chips. So when the leader walked past her row, Sarah spoke again, her voice firm but controlled. "One man here needs medicine," she said, pointing gently to the elderly man clutching his chest. "If he collapses, you'll lose control of the situation. Let me help him." The leader froze, his masked face turning slowly toward her. For a tense second, it felt like the air would shatter under his gaze. But then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "Do it, but quickly." Sarah leaned over, guiding the man's breathing, instructing the flight attendant to bring water. She wasn't just saving him, she was planting doubt in the terrorists' minds. They had expected fear and silence. Instead, Sarah offered cooperation and calm authority, making them hesitate each time they faced her. Hours crawled by. The cabin grew restless, passengers caught between exhaustion and terror. Yet Sarah's presence remained steady, a quiet pulse of courage holding the fragile line of order. She whispered to a mother to hum a lullaby for her child. She signaled silently to the crew to keep distributing water, small acts that preserved normalcy against the shadow of fear. But then came the breaking point. One of the younger terrorists, jittery and anxious, waved his rifle wildly when a passenger shifted in his seat. "Sit down," he shouted, his voice cracking. The weapon shook in his hands, dangerously close to firing. Screams filled the air. Sarah stood, every head turned to her in disbelief. She moved slowly, her palms raised, her voice calm but commanding. "Stop," she said. "Look at me. Just me." The young man's breathing was ragged, his finger tight on the trigger. Sarah's gaze locked onto his. "You don't want to do this," she continued, her voice steady like a lifeline. "You fire once and nothing will be in your control anymore. Listen to me. Just breathe. You're trembling because you're scared. I can see it." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, his weapon lowered. The tension snapped like a string pulled too tight. Passengers exhaled, some silently weeping. Sarah sat back down, her face calm though her heart hammered inside her chest. She had diffused the storm without a single shot fired. By dawn, the plane finally landed at a remote airstrip, surrounded by flashing lights and heavily armed forces. Negotiators took over, and within hours, the terrorists surrendered, worn down not just by fatigue but by the quiet, unshakable control Sarah had displayed. When the passengers were finally evacuated, many stumbled out in tears, holding each other. But one soldier on the ground stopped Sarah as she walked past. His eyes studied her with quiet recognition of what she had done. He saluted. "You kept them alive," he said softly. Sarah nodded, her voice calm, almost whispering. "Sometimes, all it takes is not losing yourself when everyone else does." And as she walked away into the light of a new morning, the truth was undeniable. In the sky, amid terror and chaos, her calm had been stronger than fear itself.